OPB Podcasts.
From the Gert Boyle studio, it's OPB Politics Now for Friday, February 13th. We're living in a time of meager public budgets. Look pretty much anywhere in Oregon these days, and you find school districts preparing cuts, state budget writers figuring out what has to go, cities looking at tough choices. So it's been notable in recent months to see the city of Portland just sort of stumbling over piles of money that no one knew was there. At the same time, the city is scrambling to make sure it keeps the Portland Trailblazers in town. To do so, it's looking at a pot of money that some say should be off limits. We are diving into the city's bank accounts today with a side of sports talk. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB politics reporter Dirk Vanderhart.
I'm OPB city politics reporter Alex Zielinski.
And I'm Monica Samayoa, the climate reporter.
So good to have both of you here today. Alex, let's start with you. Just because there have been all these unexpected headlines from you as of late, I would say. As best I can tell, this got started back in November when suddenly it turned out there was $21 million in housing money that no one seemed to know was there. And then things just sort of kept escalating.
I'm known for my unexpected headlines. But yeah. So it's been a roller coaster. Like you said, November, the city administrator's office announced that it had learned of around $21 million sitting unallocated in the Housing Bureau. That means it never was included in the department's annual budget, just floating around into the next year without a stated plan. This money in particular was generated by a fee that landlords must pay to register any new rentals. And that money is supposed to go towards programs that help tenants, eviction defense, stuff like that. The Housing Bureau said that it had been accumulating that money and not dispersing it during the COVID pandemic. That's when, if you remember, the city was getting a lot of one-time federal funding to help renters. And then it had to move that money out the door really quickly. And staff were stretched thin, focusing on the COVID money, and the other funding took a back seat. Anyways, this revelation inspired people in the city's budget office to start digging deeper into the Housing Bureau's budget to ensure that there wasn't any other untapped money floating around. And lo and behold, there was a lot of it. At first, we were told maybe 15 million more. A few days later, the city administrator released a report saying it was around 85 million more. In total, the city had found 106 million unbudgeted dollars hanging out in the Housing Bureau. And these additional dollars were a little different than that 21 million I spoke of. This money came from a patchwork of different funds that had accumulated over the years that were each intended to grow until the money was needed to pay for large projects like a new housing development or a big maintenance project. But like the rental registration funds, this money wasn't being noted anywhere in the Bureau's annual budget. So anyone outside the Housing Bureau had no idea that it existed.
It's wild stuff, right? I mean, we've covered governments for a while, and any government having more money is never bad news. It's when money is tight that things get really, things tend to get troublesome. But this turned heads in City Hall. I think City Council President Jamie Dunphy said at one point it was no way to run a city. Why are we running the city like this? Like, what happened here? How does this just kind of go unnoticed?
So I think it's a good opportunity to talk about the recent makeover Portland city government went through. So up until January 2025, Portland's bureaus all reported to city council members. And these councilors had a lot on their plate. They weren't closely focused on the inner workings of each of these bureaus. They relied on department heads letting them know if something was wrong, which was usually just, we ran out of money and we need to fight for more. We need you to stand up for us. That all changed last year when a voter-approved overhaul to the government took these bureaus away from elected officials, gave them all to a single administrative branch to control. That means all of these departments that were kind of doing their own thing for decades are now reporting to the same boss, who is setting new expectations, new standards across all bureaus. Under the previous form of government, bureaus like the Housing Bureau, they were allowed a lot of free range in how they ran their business. They could have funds accumulating money that weren't reported in their annual budget and be granted the trust of a city councilor that they had it under control. My understanding is that this is the no way to run a city that Dunphy was referring to. And Dirk, you sometimes give me a hard time about being maybe too optimistic about this new form of government. But I want to say that I think this big housing money blowup is an example of why this new system may be working. Under the new city administration, we're supposed to have, this new manager ensuring all these bureaus are meeting similar standards, running efficiently. That's kind of what happened here. This money was sitting undeclared in the Housing Bureau for years. We changed our government, and that allowed a new administrator to start kicking the tires in the city's bureaus. And they found that there was money unaccounted for. And now it's out there in the open. It's shocking. It's a lot of money. I think the instinct is to assume foul play and nefariousness.
Or just incompetence.
Sure, exactly. And that might be the case, but at the end of the day, we know it's there now. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, I was going to say the same thing. So often in the last year, we have talked about new unexpected wrinkles from this form of government, and often they are kind of unflattering or very frustrating. And this is maybe one that is positive. So I will agree with you here. But we should back up, right? Because, the city is not feeling very good about its overall budget situation right now. There are some cuts or deficits that need to be addressed. I mean, these are not times of plenty. What's it actually look like?
Yeah, at this moment, we know the city is approaching this budget cycle with a deficit of around $70 million. And we're anticipating getting news soon that hole is even larger. The city's economy is not great. People aren't building here or moving here or starting businesses here. We're struggling. So news of $106 million surprise dollars, that's a big deal.
I mean, $70 million deficit, we found 106. What are the politics around this money? Is this money city councilors can start grabbing for some of their favorite services to close these holes? Does it have to pay for housing? Is this a free-for-all? How does it work?
Well, it can't just be picked up and dropped into the city's general fund to fill the gap. I mean, it sounds really easy. But that money each comes from a different source of funding that, each has its own legal requirements to do certain things, whether that's to pay for rental programs, to cover maintenance costs on certain development projects. Some of these are really specific. And like I said earlier, this money wasn't a big surprise to people in the Housing Bureau. They knew it was there. And they had planned to use those funds on projects down the road. So there could be some trade-offs in where that money's actually going. But since we're in a budget crisis, City Council is really looking into how they can use that money right now. They are not that interested in these long-term, faraway projects. It may be a way to free up some less restricted funds in the Housing Bureau and share that with the general operating budget while keeping these funds kind of covering the basics in the Bureau. So we'll see.
And it is not, we should note, just housing money that seems to be popping up, right? You took a look this week, at the city arts tax, which is sort of the bane of all Portlanders who forget they need to do this separate $35 payment each year. It's always kind of an unwelcome surprise when I get that email and I realize another $70 from my household is leaving. But you took a look at this and there's some familiar themes. What is going on with the arts tax?
So first, a reminder, you kind of mentioned this, but what the tax is, like you said, a yearly $35 tax on any Portland resident who earns over $1,000 a year. It's meant to fund arts education programs for kids, both in public schools and nonprofits. And it's famously a headache for taxpayers like you because it's easy to miss payments and lands you dealing with the collection agency if you do miss them. I think the Council President Dunphy summed it up pretty well in an interview earlier this month. Here he is.
People in Portland love art. People in Portland love kids, and everybody hates the arts tax.
So few folks, I think, disagree with that sentiment. I was drawn to look into this tax more recently, though, after being tipped off about a line item in the Arts Fund, which showed that roughly $9 million had sat in this fund untouched since the tax began in 2012. And that raised alarms for folks in the arts community, so I started poking around to see what was going on.
And again, I mean, it's the same question. Why? We hear all the time, arts organizations are struggling, the schools are struggling to sort of provide arts education. And yet there is all this money. What is happening? Yeah,
this is kind of an odd one. So the city revenue office says that this money originated in the first year of the tax, this $9 million. They collected this, but since the city collected the tax a full year before it started to shell out the money, it just kind of sat there. It wasn't used for anything. And it's just continued to sit there. They never made a plan about what to do with this extra cash. You know, having a rainy day fund is good, having revenues is good, but there was no specifics about how much to keep in reserves, what to do with it, like when to pull a release valve to use it to kind of back up some other programs. All the while, like you mentioned, the arts nonprofits in Portland that rely on arts tax revenue have been seeing their funding decline sharply in recent years. I think a 44% drop in money just over the last year. So they're lobbying the city to release some of these funds to help shore them up.
Yeah, I mean, you know in your reporting, like, it's not, you can have reserve funds. A lot of places have reserve funds, but that wasn't part of the arts tax.
Right.
So are they allowed to have the money? I guess I just don't know.
Technically, yes. This is the response I've gotten from the city. They said, hey, it's totally fine. We're allowed. But what's odd is that every other funding mechanism in the city has a specific direction about what to do with that funding.
Right.
And I think people expect that. If you have leftover funding, you need to tell us what to do with it.
Yes. Yeah, okay.
I will say I was scolded by the city budget office, though, that this chunk of money and news around this came out around the same time as the housing money coming out, because they are not connected.
Yeah.
This does not look, we shouldn't think there's widespread chunks of money around the city, but why not? Like, why not assume the worst and then be delighted if there's not?
Yeah, I mean, the trend seems to be widespread chunks of money at this point, so prove me wrong. Let's turn to one more pot of money in the city that has generated some actually unexpected revenues. Monica, you took a look at this pot of money, the Portland Clean Energy Fund, this week. Why were you interested in it?
Yeah, well, it's being eyed as a potential funding source to help renovate the Moda Center. So last week, reports came out that Mayor Keith Wilson wants to use at least $75 million from the Portland Clean Energy Fund to help do just that. And this is happening because the new Portland Trailblazers owner wants backing from the city that it will help revitalize the arena. And if the city comes through, this could mean that the Blazers may stay in Portland for at least 2 decades.
You know, I remember voting on the PSEF, as it's known. I think this was all the way back in 2018. I don't remember thinking that arena upgrades would be on the list of things that it would pay for. Can you remind us, like, how does the PSEF work? What is it supposed to be doing?
Yeah, so PSEF is a 1% tax on the retail sales of large corporations in the city. So that means any large company making over $1 billion pays into the fund. And I don't know about you, but I've been seeing that list of billion-dollar companies grow so much so that some of them are hitting trillions. And that's really how PSEF is making money, from those companies making even more money. And the goal of the fund is to address social and racial justice and environmental justice gaps. And it funds programs that the city wasn't finding money for, and all at the same time reducing the city's carbon emissions. So basically, that money is going toward climate-related projects, including energy efficiency retrofits. So we've all seen those newer housing units being built, and they're keeping in mind like better insulation, as well as adding heat pumps to reduce energy use. We've seen some of that money go into renewable energy development. PSEF helped fund a community solar project, and that helps reduce electricity bills for residents in a Cully neighborhood, those that signed up. And it's also providing job training and construction and in the energy field, like solar installations.
And I think PSEF is just another one of these that has generated a lot more than was initially expected. I think something like 4 times more. But how much extra is this tax bringing in than we expected?
A lot more, like a billy. So back when you voted on this, city officials estimated that it would bring in, let's say, at most $60 million a year. Now, PSEF staff tells me it's nearing $200 million a year, and that's going to increase by 2029. And that's a big difference from the original estimate, and help this fund go from potential millions to billions of dollars. And so right now, the fund is estimated to generate $1.71 billion by mid-2029. And that has so many people getting googly-eyed about it. But the fund is already spoken for. So those categories that I just mentioned, like renewable energy projects and energy efficiency upgrades, they're all part of this larger plan that was created to help identify where this money would make the most sense while keeping the original goal in mind. So when PSEV saw how much money this fund was expected to generate, it created the 5-year plan. And within that plan, that's how they allocated, here's where all of this is going through mid-2029. And they have so many projects, so many plans. They spent 18 months creating this. So it wasn't a thing that just kind of like popped up, oh, we're going to have this plan and this is how the money is going to be spent. There was a lot of community input to help move this forward. So while people see that big B attached to this number, the money has already been accounted for, meaning if this proposal moves forward, city officials need to decide who and what programs they want to cut to make room for the Moda Center request.
Yeah, they are essentially saying, we are not the folks that have $100 million sitting around. This money is money we are planning to spend, and we have laid out how we're going to do so. And as you know, here we have Mayor Wilson suggesting he would like to take at least a piece of that. This is part of this unified strategy, we should note, by the city, by Multnomah County, and by state lawmakers and the governor that has just begun to emerge. And I want to just stop to explain this for a minute. I know, Monica, you touched on some of this, but the Trailblazers are due to change owners next month. A Texan named Tom Dundon will own the team. And with that new ownership comes really, I think, a lot of fear for Oregon officials. They look at the Moda Center, which opened about 30 years ago, and there has been an unsubtle suggestion that if the Moda is not spiffed up, brought up to modern standards, Dundon could decide to take his new basketball franchise elsewhere. So this week we saw top electeds really at the state, county, and city level come to the Capitol, all saying they want to spend public tax dollars to fund an upgrade. And as part of that, as we've been saying, Mayor Wilson talked about something like $400 million total from the city over the course of decades to pay for this. He said he expected the city to start with possibly a $120 million down payment. Monica, I think that is probably where the PSEF money comes in. And let's note here, too, coming for PSEF money for things that maybe weren't originally intended when voters passed this tax is not a new idea.
Oh, no. This is not the first time nor the last time they're going to hear from elected officials that want to use PSEF money, especially for things outside of its original intent. So we've seen many requests over the years, like funding for Portland street response to the city's fire bureau. There's actually a current initiative right now that would want to take a certain percentage of the yearly generated revenue to hire more police officers. But that plan that I talked about that took months to create, here's this. Within that plan, Portland got a good chunk of money because the original estimates didn't match what was really coming in. Part of that new plan now includes funding for 6 city bureaus' existing climate-related projects. And last I saw, the city is getting $623 million over the course of the plan. So it's not like Portland hasn't gotten anything from PSEF. In fact, if you look at it, it's a little less than half of what the fund is expected to generate. So even that hasn't stopped talks about using more. And like I said, it's not going to be the first time or the last time we're going to hear about using funds like this.
Alex, how do you read the politics of all this in City Hall? I mean, do you have a sense of how councilors feel about A, supporting a big public payout to a billionaire team owner, but also B, just using the PSEF to do it?
So off the record, no one
that doesn't work here.
No one is thrilled to use any of the scant city money to convince a billionaire to not take our Blazers away. But on the record, their hands are a little tied. I'm fairly confident that if it comes to a vote, enough councilors will vote to use PSEF money to pay for motor renovations. No one wants to be the person responsible for losing the Blazers. There's a lot of numbers floating around with this. One is that the Blazers bring in something like, roughly $700 million annually in regional economic impact, risking that is not something councilors want on their conscience either. There are some councilors who will vote no, who are really staunchly against this. They've already made that clear because they disagree with PSEF being used to support this arena, but it's not enough to squander the deal.
Well, and I just want to note there are a lot of the finances just seem very unclear because we have heard, I think, a $75 million figure from Wilson's office about PSEF. He's saying $120 million up front from the city. So where that delta is closed, like I just don't think we have much detail, right?
Yeah, there's still a lot we need to suss out.
I should note how things are playing out at the state here. I think it's very similar to City Hall. So, the politics seem to be fairly overwhelming right now, at least in the one big hearing on it, in favor of public subsidies for the MOTA. As I mentioned, that hearing featured the governor. It featured the Senate president, Rob Wagner. It featured Ben Bowman, the House Democratic leader. All of them really offering this full-throated support for using public tax dollars on the MOTA at a time, the state is actually anticipating years of budget reductions. I'm going to let Ben Bowman, the House Democratic leader, sort of make the case. This is pretty representative of what we heard.
The Portland Trailblazers do not exist without the MOTA Center. This is a market rate deal. This is what it costs. If we let the Blazers slip away, just like Seattle did with the Supersonics, there will be a line of cities across the country lining up to have them come to their city. Investing in an institution like this is not about nostalgia, it's about foresight. And for those of us who grew up watching this team, who suffered through the 2000 Western Conference Finals, who leapt to their feet watching Brandon Roy hit buzzer beaters, and who cheered when Damian Lillard returned to Portland, this isn't abstract. It's personal and it's practical.
I should note that chiming you heard in the tape was the bell that said Bowman's time was up, even as he kept charging ahead with his diatribe. But let's talk about how this works. The state is talking about putting income taxes paid by the Trailblazers organization into a special fund that could pay for arena upgrades. So some people paint it as the Blazers paying for their own arena. That's a little specious because this also means that money that currently goes into the general fund to pay for things like schools or healthcare or public safety would not be doing so going forward. Any agreement like this would be contingent on the Blazers agreeing to remain in Portland for long term, obviously. And Multnomah County is part of this too. We heard from Chair Jessica Vega Peterson this week. She said they're expecting to take a vote on kicking in something like $88 million to this whole thing. The Blazers have put a $600 million price tag on this renovation. It's very, very unclear where that number comes from. But I think we're going to see if this support holds up. I think there are already voices cropping up that are saying, the state, the city need to really be asking for more if they're going to drop that kind of money. And I think it's also deeply unclear whether Dundon or the Trailblazers are going to agree to fund any portion of the arena project or are just going to use this leverage they seem to have over the city and the state to insist that the public funds it. With that said, we will leave it there for today. Of course, we are going to continue to track this both in the Capitol and City Hall and county headquarters. Thanks to both of you so much for coming on. This week's episode of OPB Politics Now was recorded live in the Gert Boyle studio. It was produced by Sage Van Wing, and our audio engineer is Nalene Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting, as always, at opb.org. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.